The crash it was a quiet night on Earth. The stars were bright and the wind was soft. Far away from cities, in the middle of a deep forest, a small wooden cabin stood. Inside the cabin lived a man named Jake. He was a farmer, and he liked peace. He lived alone with his dog Max, but that night, peace was broken. Suddenly, the sky turned red. A loud sound filled the air, like a scream from the sky. Jake ran outside, his heart beating fast. He looked up and saw two balls of fire falling from the sky. They were coming down fast, burning bright like meteors. Then boom, the ground shook. As the objects crashed into the forest, not far from his farm, Max barked loudly, afraid. Jake grabbed his flashlight and ran into the woods. He didn't know what he was going to find. But something told him this was important, very important. The forest was dark. The trees were glowing from the crash. Smoke filled the air, and the smell was strange like metal and fire. Jake moved carefully, pushing branches away. Then, he saw something that made him stop. A small ship, broken in pieces, was lying in a big crater. Sparks flew from the sides, and blue lights blinked slowly. But that was not the shocking part. Next to the ship, lying on the ground, were two figures. Not human, but not scary either. They looked like girls, young, weak, and cold. Their skin was pale blue. And their eyes were closed. They had no clothes, only silver marks glowing on their bodies. They were hurt, and they were not from this world. Jake's hands shook, but he didn't run. Something in his heart said these girls needed help. He took off his jacket and covered one of them. Then he removed his shirt and gave it to the other. They were breathing, but slowly. He picked them up one by one and carried them back to his cabin. Back at the cabin, he made a fire. He wrapped the girls in blankets and gave them water. They opened their eyes slowly, confused and scared. They looked around. Not knowing where they were, Jake smiled gently and said, "It's okay. You're safe here." They didn't understand the words, but his voice was kind. One of the girls tried to speak, but no words came. She touched her chest and pointed to the stars. Jake understood they came from far away. Very far. He called them Arya and Nyla. He didn't know their real names, but it felt right. They stayed in the cabin, hiding from the world every day. They learned small English words: water, food, sleep, safe, thank you. They liked learning, and they were fast. But at night, they cried in silence. Jake saw the pain in their eyes. They had lost something, maybe everything. One night, Jake woke up and saw something strange. Arya was standing near the window, glowing softly. Her hands were in the air, and she was whispering something. Nyla stood beside her, her eyes shining bright. They were doing something strange, maybe magic, maybe science. Jake didn't interrupt. He just watched quietly. Then, the light faded, and they went back to sleep. Jake knew now these girls were not just visitors. They were special, and they were hiding a secret. The next morning, Jake went to town to buy more clothes and food. While he was gone, a strange sound came from the sky. A black drone, silent and fast, flew over the cabin. It stopped for a moment, scanned the area, and left. The girls saw it and got scared. They knew someone was coming. Someone was looking. For them, when Jake returned, he saw fear in their eyes. They pointed to the sky and drew the drone in the dirt. Jake understood they were not safe anymore. Whoever sent the drone knew they were here that night. Jake sat by the fire with Max and looked at the stars. His life had changed. He had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was clear: he would protect the girls. No matter what, because even if they were from another world, they were now part of his. And maybe, just maybe, he was part of something much bigger than he ever imagined. The days passed slowly, but change was coming fast. Arya and Nyla were no longer scared all the time. They smiled now, just a little. When Jake made jokes, they learned how to eat human food, wear clothes, and even pet Max the dog. Jake had turned one of his storage rooms into a small bedroom for them. It wasn't much, but to the girls, it felt like a palace, because before this, they had nothing. No home, no warmth, no one to trust. But even with peace in the cabin, there was a feeling Jake could not shake, a feeling that something was hidden, something deep. He saw it in their eyes. There was pain, yes, but also knowledge. They knew more than they were showing. They were not just lost girls. They were survivors of something bigger. One evening, the power went out. It wasn't unusual in the forest, but it felt different this time. Outside, everything was quiet, too quiet. Jake lit a candle and walked to the back room to check the fuse. As he opened the door, he froze. Arya was standing in the middle of the room. Her hands were raised and her eyes were closed. A blue circle of light floated. Around her, symbols Jake had never seen danced in the air like fireflies. Nyla was beside her, holding a glowing stone, whispering soft sounds. The candle flickered. But the room stayed lit by them. Jake stepped back, not afraid, just amazed. They weren't using machines. They were using something else, something powerful. When Arya opened her eyes, the light disappeared. She looked at Jake with wide eyes, surprised and maybe a little afraid. Jake raised his hand slowly. "It's okay," he said. "I won't tell anyone." He meant it, and they believed him. The next morning, Jake brought out an old notebook and a pencil. He drew a star, a moon, and a ship. He pointed to them, and then to the girls. It was time for answers. Nyla looked at Arya, then took the pencil and drew a planet broken in half. Then she drew many ships flying away from it. Arya added 2 small figures in one of the ships. Jake understood. Their home was gone. Destroyed. They were running, just like lost children in the dark. Later that day, Arya found an old radio in Jake's shed. She smiled and took it apart like a puzzle. Her fingers moved fast, rewiring parts, replacing wires. Nyla found a small crystal in her pocket. Jake didn't know how it got there. They connected it to the radio, and suddenly the machine came to life. But it didn't play music. It hummed, glowed, and showed a small star map. Jake watched in silence. This was not a toy. This was a beacon. They were trying to call someone. Maybe from their world, maybe from another. That night, Jake asked a question slowly, carefully. "Are there others like you?" Arya nodded, but then her face turned sad. She pointed to the stars and then drew a red X through many planets. Her people were almost gone, hunted, destroyed, forgotten. But she and Nyla were not just escapees. They were important, maybe royalty, maybe leaders. They carried something inside them, knowledge, power, or maybe a mission. Jake was starting to see the truth. This crash was not an accident. These girls were not random visitors. They were chosen, or maybe sent, and now, Earth was part of their journey. But peace never lasts long. While the girls slept, the forest outside wasn't quiet anymore. Something was watching. A small black device, shaped like a bug, crawled across the trees. Its red eye blinked once, then vanished into the sky. Miles away, in a dark control room, a man in a black suit stared at a screen. The signal was strong now. He zoomed in on a photo of the girls standing near Jake's barn. The words on the screen said, "Target acquired." He smiled coldly and gave the order. "Send the team. We've found them." Back at the cabin, Jake woke up from a bad dream. He stepped outside and looked at the stars. They looked beautiful. But tonight, they felt closer. He felt like the sky was looking back. Inside, Arya and Nyla slept holding hands. The glowing stone pulsed gently. It was waiting, listening. Jake didn't know what was coming. But he knew the secret was out. The world would never be the same again. The sun rose slowly, but the cabin felt cold. Something was wrong, and Jake could feel it in his bones. The air was heavy, like before a storm, but there were no clouds, no wind, just silence. Arya stood by the window, staring at the trees. Nyla was sitting on the floor, holding the glowing crystal close to her chest. Max the dog paced around the cabin. Growling softly, he never growled before, not unless danger was near. Jake checked the power lines outside. Nothing seemed broken. But when he looked up, he saw something strange. A bird. Or at least what looked like one was frozen on a tree. Too still, too perfect. Then it blinked red and flew away without flapping its wings. He rushed back inside, locked the door, and looked at the girls. "They found us," he said, voice low and tight. The girls didn't understand the words, but they felt the fear. They felt it too. That night, a black van stopped near the forest. 3 people stepped out, dressed in black from head to toe. No badges, no names, just machines and silence. They didn't knock, they didn't ask. They started scanning the area with strange devices. The trees whispered as if warning each other. Inside the cabin, Arya clutched the crystal tightly. It started to glow again, but the light was dim. Nyla placed her hand on the floor and closed her eyes. Jake watched, confused. As small blue roots grew under her fingers, they disappeared in seconds. But he understood. They were sensing something watching. The forest, like the trees themselves. Suddenly, a sharp alarm echoed in the air. The black suit agents stopped and looked around. Their devices picked up a strong signal. One agent whispered into his radio, "We have life readings, non-human." Then they moved forward toward the cabin. Jake didn't wait. He opened a trap door hidden under the carpet. "Go," he said, pointing down. "Hide there. Now." The girls obeyed without question. They trusted him now he had fed them, saved them, and cared. Jake grabbed his shotgun, not to fight, but to scare. He stood near the door as footsteps crunched the leaves outside. Knock, knock. But it wasn't a friendly knock. It was cold, hard, and full of warning. "Mr. Jake Harper." A voice called out, "We're here on a matter of security. Please open the door." Jake didn't move. He knew what they really wanted. He stayed silent, hoping they would go away, but they didn't. A loud bang followed. The door burst open. 3 black-clad figures stepped in, scanning the room with red lights. "Where are they?" one of them asked. Jake said nothing, just stared. One agent moved toward the bedroom. Another checked the kitchen. Then one of them walked toward the carpet down below, in the darkness. Arya pressed her hand against the wood. The crystal glowed again, and something happened. The lights in the cabin exploded with sparks. The walls cracked as if hit by a wave of invisible energy. All 3 agents screamed and dropped their gear. Jake stood frozen as the power returned and everything went quiet. The agents looked at each other, afraid now. One of them whispered, "Abort mission," and just like that, they left fast and silent. When they were gone, Jake opened the trapdoor. The girls climbed out, shaking. Jake hugged them both without thinking. He didn't need to ask what they did. He just knew they had protected themselves and him that night. Arya drew more symbols on a piece of paper. She showed a planet, a star, and a black eye watching from above. Then she crossed the eye out and drew fire around it. Jake understood. They were being hunted. Yes, but they were not helpless. Nyla tapped her hand over her heart and then over Jake's. Then she said, softly, "You? Safe. With us." Jake smiled, though fear still lived in the back of his mind. He was part of this now. Not just a helper, not just a man in the woods, but something more. He was family. To them, he was home, far away, in a hidden base. The agents reported failure. Their boss did not speak. He just stared at the glowing map on the screen. A red dot blinked in the middle of the forest. But now it had turned blue. Something had changed. The hunt had begun, but the prey was not what they expected. Asterisk, the wind howled through the trees like a warning. Leaves danced across the dirt path outside Jake's cabin. Inside, everything felt too still, too quiet. Like the calm before a storm, Arya sat by the window, eyes scanning the treetops. Nyla sat on the floor with Max beside her. She was tracing strange lines into the wooden boards. They glowed faintly, like light trying to remember itself. Jake was in his shed, pulling apart old radios, car parts, and broken farm tools. He didn't know how to build a spaceship, but he could build anything to help them call for help. He wiped sweat from his face, picked up a rusted battery, and thought, this might be useless. He whispered, but we've got to try. That night, Arya brought the crystal to Jake. She placed it gently in his hands. It pulsed with lights low. Steady, alive, he felt it move, like a heartbeat. The girls were trying to connect it to his machine. Together, they were building more than a signal. They were building a bridge between worlds. Nyla added something new, a tiny cube from their crashed ship. When it clicked into place, the air shimmered for a second. Then a small hologram flickered to life above the table. Stars, planets, and a red circle around one system, their home. Now marked as lost, Jake stared in awe. He was just a farmer. But in this moment, he felt like something else. An inventor, a protector, a man standing between two galaxies. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Max began to bark, running to the door. Jake rushed out, shotgun in hand. In the distance, red lights danced between the trees' drones, 3 of them, moving fast, scanning every inch of the forest. They're coming back, Jake said, teeth clenched. Arya nodded, her face calm but serious. She opened her hand, revealing a small silver sphere. She placed it on the floor and pressed it. The sphere unfolded like a flower, then hovered into the air. A protective field grew around the cabin, invisible but strong. It would block scanners, but not for long. They had only hours before someone would break through. We have to leave, Jake said. They won't stop. Arya pointed to the machine, then to the stars. She traced a line through the hologram Earth to a blue planet. A safe world, far away. If they could activate the beacon, a ship might find them. But the device needed time, at least 2 hours to charge, and in 2 hours, those men, in black, would be back with more than just drones. Nyla walked to Jake and placed her hand on his chest. Then she pointed to the forest. Then to herself, she would go outside, distract the enemy. Jake shook his head. No, too dangerous, but she touched his face gently and said, hope. Then smiled. Arya stayed with Jake, helping him finish the last pieces of the signal machine. Nyla moved quietly through the trees. She carried the glowing crystal with her. Its light left a trail, pulling the drones away from the cabin. The agents arrived soon after, 6 of them. Armed and ready, they found Nyla near the stream, standing still like a statue. She looked weak, small, harmless. They aimed their weapons, but before they could fire, the crystal flashed. A wave of blue light burst out, knocking them to the ground. Not enough to kill, just enough to blind. Confuse and delay, Nyla ran, jumping over rocks, diving under fallen trees. She led them away from the cabin like a shadow in the wind. Back at the farm, the machine was ready. Jake flipped the final switch. The beacon rose into the sky and shot a single beam of white light into space. It vanished in seconds, but the message was sent. Arya collapsed from the effort, her energy nearly gone. Jake caught her before she hit the floor. You did it, he said. Now we wait. Hours passed. Nyla didn't return. Jake paced the room, his heart heavy. He thought of going to find her, but then she came, limping, hurt, but alive. Max ran to her, barking with joy. Jake helped her inside, her arm bleeding, but she smiled and pointed to the sky. "Soon," she whispered, "they come." Outside, clouds began to swirl above the forest. Wind picked up, and a strange sound filled the air. Not thunder, not rain. Something else, something from far beyond the stars. Jake stepped outside and looked up. A blue light blinked once in the sky, then twice. Something, or someone, was answering the call. The escape plan had started, but leaving Earth wouldn't be so easy. Because someone else had seen the signal too, and they were coming. Fast, not to save the girls, but to end them. The sky had changed. It was no longer dark, no longer calm. A spiral of light opened above the forest like a giant eye. It didn't blink, it didn't move, it just waited. Jake stood frozen. The trees around him bent gently, as if pulled by something. Above, Max whimpered and hid behind the porch. Even the night animals had gone quiet. Everything was watching the sky. Inside the cabin, Arya held Neela's hand. Their bodies were weak, their energy low, but their eyes glowed brighter than ever. They weren't afraid. They were ready. The portal shimmered like liquid glass. Then it roared soft at first, then louder, like thunder being whispered by the stars. A small ship appeared through the light. Silver, smooth, and shaped like a crescent moon, it hovered above the cabin, lowering slowly. Its surface rippled like water, reflecting the night and the fear below. Jake backed away, shielding his eyes. The ship landed without sound. No engines, no fire, just pure light. A door opened. But no one came out. The girls looked at each other and nodded. Arya walked forward, limping. Nyla followed close behind, her arm wrapped in cloth. Jake stepped forward too, but Arya turned to him. She pointed at the ground. "Stay." Jake didn't move. His heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to go with them. He wanted to protect them, but this was something else, something he couldn't understand. Something not made for human eyes or human steps. Then Nyla looked back, walked to him, and pressed the crystal into his hand. "You," she said, "hope," and smiled. Jake watched. As the girls stepped into the light, the ship rose, slow and steady. Then the portal started to close. The sky began to darken, but just before the portal vanished, a shadow moved behind the trees. A voice shouted, "Stop them!" Gunfire cracked, sharp and sudden. Jake turned and saw the men in black, 6 of them, maybe more, running through the woods, weapons raised. One bullet hit the ship's side. It bounced off like a drop of water, but another hit the ground near Nyla, throwing dust into the air. Jake didn't think. He raised his shotgun and fired into the trees. Not to hurt, just to delay. "Go." He yelled, "Get out of here." The ship paused for half a second, then lifted faster. Nyla reached down from the doorway and grabbed Jake's hand. For a moment, he was weightless. For a moment, he was flying. Then, the light snapped shut, and they were gone. Jake opened his eyes. Everything was different. The sky was purple, the grass was blue, and 2 moons hung above the horizon. He was no longer on Earth. The girls helped him up, smiling through tears. They had made it. They had escaped, but this planet was not their home. It was a safe world, a quiet one of the last free places in their part of the galaxy. Alien trees moved like they were breathing. The ground sparkled with crystal dust, and strange birds flew in slow circles above, but the peace didn't last long. A message buzzed from the crystal in Jake's pocket. He held it up, and a small red light flashed. Arya touched the crystal and frowned. The signal was clear. Someone had followed them. Someone from Earth, or maybe worse. An enemy who had destroyed their home might now know where they were. They had come into the unknown to escape, but now the unknown was looking back. Later that night, the three sat by a small alien fire. Jake cleaned Nyla's wound. Arya drew maps into the glowing dirt. Max chased a floating light nearby, barking like he'd been here all his life. Jake looked at the two girls and said, "You're not running anymore." Arya looked up. "No," she said. "We fight because sometimes hope isn't found on the ground you stand on. Sometimes it's carried by those who refuse to give up." Even when their world is gone, into the unknown, they had escaped. But now, they would turn and face whatever came next. Together, the sky over the alien world had turned red. Not with fire, but with memory. It was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes before something terrible. Arya stood on a cliff, staring into the distance. She didn't blink, because she saw more than what was there. She saw her past, her destroyed planet, her people running, her family. Gone behind her, Nyla sat near a shallow pond, watching her reflection ripple. Jake stood between them, holding a piece of metal from their broken ship. He was building again, but this time, it wasn't just to help them escape. It was to help them survive. The safe planet wasn't safe anymore. A new signal had reached them, coded. Broken, but clear. A warning, they're coming. The enemy wasn't just hunting, they were preparing for war. And this time, they weren't looking to capture. They were coming to erase. That night, Arya sat by the fire and told Jake a story. Her voice was soft, her English still broken, but the message was strong. Long ago, our world, full of light, she said. We shared, we grew, we danced with stars. Then her eyes darkened, but then came them. Black ships, black hearts, no faces, they take all. Jake listened quietly. He understood Naria and Nyla were not just survivors, they were leaders. They were once part of a council that guarded ancient knowledge. Secrets that could control time, energy, even life. Secrets that were dangerous in the wrong hands. And now, those hands were reaching across the stars again. Nyla reached into her bag and pulled out a small cube. She pressed it, and it unfolded into a map. Dozens of planets flickered on it. Most of them crossed out in red. Only a few remained, blinking softly, safe zones, barely alive. Jake looked at the blinking dots. He pointed to one nearby. Can we go there? Nyla shook her head. Too late, she said. War comes. Here, the next morning, the sky cracked. Black ships tore through the clouds like knives. Silent, fast, heartless. The first blast hit the edge of the valley. No warning, no sound. Just light. The ground shook, birds screamed, trees fell. Jake, Arya, and Nyla ran. They had minutes, maybe less, but they had a plan. Deep in the mountains, there was an old temple, built by the same ancient race who had taught the girls' people long ago. It was hidden, protected, and powerful. If they could reach it, they might find what they needed. A weapon, a code, a force strong enough to push back. They climbed the rocks as fire rained behind them. Jake pulled Nyla up when she slipped. Arya covered them with a glowing shield. She was getting stronger. The planet was waking something inside her. At the top of the hill, the temple stood, silent and proud. Its doors opened with just a touch from Arya's hand. Inside, the air was cold, but not dead. The walls were made of light and stone. Symbols floated in the air like dust. In the center stood a throne, empty, glowing, waiting. Arya stepped forward. As she did, the symbols spun faster. A voice filled the chamber, not in words, but in feeling. You have returned. Arya placed both hands on the throne. The room shook, and her eyes lit up with fire. Visions flooded her mind, her home, her parents, her mission. She was not just a leader. She was the last queen, chosen by the stars. Hidden from death, carried by fate, Jake and Nyla watched in silence. Then the ground cracked. Something was entering the temple. The enemy had followed. A tall figure stepped through the smoke. It wore no face, only a mask of shadows. Its voice was like metal grinding. "You were supposed to die," it said. Jake raised his weapon. But it shook in his hands. He wasn't enough. Not against this, but Arya stood, no longer afraid. The symbols around her spun into a circle, then flew into her chest. She stepped forward, hands raised. "I was supposed to lead," she said. Then light exploded from her. The enemy screamed, its body cracking under the pressure. Nyla joined her, their powers combining into a single beam. Jake dove aside as the entire temple shook with light. When it was over, the figure was gone. Only smoke remained. Arya dropped to her knees. Nyla held her tight, both breathing hard. Jake ran to them. Hugging them both, the war had returned, but so had the queen, and this time she wasn't running. Smoke curled into the alien sky. The temple walls had stopped shaking, but inside, nothing felt still. Not in Jake's heart, not in Nyla's eyes, not in the air around Arya, who stood like a queen reborn. Her body glowed faintly, no longer weak, no longer hiding. The ancient energy had chosen her, trusted her. She had awakened something old, something powerful, but now something heavy sat in her chest. Victory had a price, and she knew it wasn't over yet. Jake walked beside her, slow, steady, unsure what to say. He wasn't a warrior, he wasn't a king, but he had stayed when he could have walked away, and that meant more than any weapon. Nyla leaned on him, tired but smiling. She pointed to the sky, where the black ships were pulling away. They weren't destroyed, but they were leaving for now. The temple had frightened them. The queen had spoken, but the planet wasn't healing. Not yet. Arya stepped to the edge of the cliff. Her cape of light fluttered in the breeze. She looked down at the world that had given them shelter. She whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned back to Jake and said softly, "We go." Jake nodded, not asking where. He had learned something important on this journey. Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a promise. They returned to the landing site. The same ship that had brought them from Earth still floated there. Repaired by Arya's power, it now pulsed with soft light as they stepped aboard. Jake turned for one last look. The trees waved as if saying goodbye. Max barked once from inside the cabin, tail wagging. Even the stars above seemed closer now. The ship lifted gently. No roar, no blast, just a quiet hum like a lullaby. As they broke through the clouds, Arya held the crystal in her hand. It glowed again, stronger than ever. A new message had been received. A location, a signal from survivors. They were not alone, not anymore. The journey through space was long, but this time there was no fear. The three of them sat around a blue table inside the ship. Jake looked out the window, watching stars pass like fireflies. He smiled, remembering his small wooden cabin, his quiet farm, his simple life, and then he looked at Arya and Nyla, the two alien girls who once had nothing, no home, no clothes, no hope, and now they had a future. "We don't go back to Earth?" Jake asked. Arya shook her head. "Earth. Not safe, not yet." Then she placed her hand on his chest and said, "But you, come with us." Jake blinked, surprised me. Nyla giggled softly. She pointed to the stars and said, "Home is not only Earth." Jake laughed for the first time in days. He didn't know what planet they were heading to. He didn't know what dangers waited, but he knew one thing. He wasn't alone. Later, the ship arrived at a glowing station floating above a blue planet. Alien beings walked inside. Some looked human. Some didn't, but they didn't run. They didn't fight. They welcomed Arya and Nyla with bowed heads and soft music. Word had spread. The lost royal blood had returned. with a human inside the hall, Arya was offered a throne. She didn't take it. Instead, she stood beside Jake and Nyla. She said 3 words that echoed through the chamber. "Together, we heal." Applause came like a wave. Hope filled the air. For the first time since her home was destroyed, Arya felt peace. Jake looked up at the domed ceiling. A star map showed every planet still alive. Still free, he pointed to Earth. Far away, someday, they would go back. Not to run, but to help. And maybe one day someone else would crash in a forest, cold, lost, and alone. And someone like Jake would say again, "Come home." Not because it was easy, but because it was right. Because sometimes the smallest kindness can rewrite the stars.